Welcome to video 6 for the Zap Accounting Software Bookkeeping Template. This should wrap up the basic functionality. We're going to wrap up a couple of pieces of that and get into a little bit more optional functionality where I actually start to blend a little bit of managerial accounting into this. I tried not to do it too much, but this was the right place to do a couple of things. So the first thing we're going to talk about in the chart of accounts, I haven't shown you so far, there's actually more information in here. This is where you configure some information here. And then this is a dashboard that tells you what your current balances are, when the last time was what the last statements were you have recorded, what the last transaction dates were in each of the journals, etc. And this can be customized. You could actually take this, if I'm not mistaken, and last transaction date. I could get the last transaction date for every account in here. So I'll show you how to customize that in some other videos. But over here on the far right is a budgeting add-on. So there's a software company. You need a budget, YNAB, and their entire thing is encouraging people to get on budgets, which to me is typically in the personal life, you have to make excess money generally to need a budget. If you don't make excess money, you just spend on what you need and that's it. So budgeting fits a niche of people that make more money than they spend, and they have decisions to make. And ironically, it's hard to find software that really does the proper job of allowing you to do your income statement and balance sheet correctly and then easily compare budgeted amounts. So what we've got a budgeting add-on, and I can actually set several budgets in here. It doesn't just have to be one. I've got, for every column, I can create a budget, and I could add columns in here, and I could have 5 or 7 different types of budgets. This was primarily designed to do different budgets for different ZIDs, which I haven't even introduced to you yet. So bottom line is when it comes to setting a budget for individual line items, it happens actually on the chart of accounts over here on the far right. The next worksheet I want to introduce you to is this worksheet called ZIDs. ZIDs doesn't make much sense. What this is a generic word that I made up to allow you a secondary categorization column on your journals. So when you go into transactions, I've had it hidden, but there's a column for ZIDs. The place that I use this personally is I have several rental properties. And instead of having one bookkeeping file for each rental property, I have all my properties, or a subset of my properties, managed together with a single checking account I call my checking rentals account. And then I use ZIDs to denote the different properties. So I can actually see how I've done with my real estate all in one file, but I can also break down my income statement. If you were watching earlier, I had it actually open. I can also break down my income statement by ZID. I'm not going to do it here. This data isn't valid in this sample data because there's no transactions allocated to them, but this allows somebody who has real estate to do that. Technically, you could also use this for customers or clients. But again, that's really beyond the scope of tax accounting, and you really would want to have a reason to do that in here. I'm going to get into it later where you can actually run 2 sets of books, and I don't mean a legal set and an illegal set. You can actually run 2 sets of books legally, where one has a chart of accounts that's ideal for your tax and bookkeeping accounting, and the other has a chart of accounts that's ideal for you. You can categorize the transactions separately and do separate things. And in that, this ZID functionality may become more relevant there too. So I'll get into different strategies to how you can use this, but just know that it's there. That's what it is. It's basically for a secondary categorization on your transactions. The next feature that we have is I've got an income statement where it compares the budget versus actual. This is an extremely busy report. It took a long time to try to get a layout that seemed attractive. If we turn it on, it'll take a while to load, but there we go. We show our monthly budget here. We show our actual monthly averages here. And then we have the actual minus budget. And then we have the changes as a percent. When you get into budgeting, it's a little confusing actually when you're trying to program it and make things that are good, because if you're under budget, is that good or bad? Well, typically it's good. So you'd show it as green, but that's a negative sign. So you can custom configure this once you really get the hang of budgeting and what's going on. If you don't like the coloring that I've done, or you don't like the way I've presented the percents, because this is a spreadsheet, you can customize it. So this is actually surprisingly more complex than most people would think when they first set out to do it. There's all kinds of hidden columns on here that show you how it works, and keys that I use to make the thing work, little codes and tricks that I use to, whether it's a positive value or negative value, an income account or expense account. So this is pretty tricky. And I haven't shown you in the other reports, but the data that's going into building this is actually a general ledger subset. You have to run I run a pre-query here to do that. So a lot of good educational tools here, and you can see how complex it is and why it's actually a little harder to build this kind of software, especially in a database, than most might imagine. And the last worksheet I'm going to show you here is a historical. What everybody's going to be used to is seeing historical records of balance sheets, because that's the way everybody's done it in the past. I keep one from, well, in this case, I have one from 2015, and then I have the first quarter of 2016, the second quarter, and the third quarter, and the fourth quarter. Most people are used to seeing this monthly. But the reality is, with our system, you don't necessarily have to keep static copies of your balance sheet. And if you do, it gets a little tricky. If you add and remove accounts over time, you have to actually add different rows to accommodate the old accounts. And that was one of the problems I seem to recall from 10 or 20 years ago. When I'd have an account that was no longer active, it would still show up on the balance sheet, or you had to hide it. It got really complex. So once you understand what the balance sheet is, which is really a cross-check tool, and not necessarily needed in this manner for historical, and with our cross-check tool always is cross-checking the data for any given date range that I give it, which then I don't really need the historical tracking. And that gets back to the conspiracy around a balance sheet in general. A balance sheet does have a start date and an end date, contrary to every definition you will find in mainstream media and in mainstream curriculum. This is probably the biggest misdirection that I've found in mainstream curriculum. And without understanding that, it was impossible to understand the balance sheet or what it did. So this is going to wrap up video 6. This is our first 6 videos for the bookkeeping, the Zap accounting software bookkeeping template. We've now seen all the basic functionality. In this last video, you've seen a little bit of the optional functionality that we could call basic or advanced. That really starts to border on managerial accounting, and we don't really want to go much further. And I've alluded to the fact that there's actually a way to use this for more of a managerial accounting approach that we'll get into some other time. There are a few more bits of functionality here that you have not seen, with the biggest being a cross-check system that was developed before I had a balance sheet. That's pretty fascinating, a way to cross-check your accounting and look and find errors and drill down and find them. By the way, with this system, when your balance sheet goes out of balance, you can set through it by day and find out where it went out. So it's very easy to troubleshoot. There's also a transaction generator in here for doing data modeling and life simulation, which is extremely powerful. So I'll get into these in some other videos. And then there's a bank statement generator, which allows you to work with the transaction generator, and generate your own sample data and your own bank statements, such that you can create demo data, just like I have, for your own industry or for your own classroom or for those that are going to learn from you or learn with you. So the bookkeeping template itself comes with 1 year's worth of data for an acupuncture practice. And the net income should always be $59,000. I made it that way, so this is how I could make sure that I hadn't screwed up my software as I developed it and made changes to it. I could always go back and make sure I had the right information. So there's a lot more to this under the hood than even what you've seen so far, but you've seen all the basic functionality and the advanced functionality you'd ever need to do your basic tax accounting. And this wraps up video 6.